Love now and
Did you fall in love last night?
Love was stronger than anything you can
For the love.
And I love you more than anything.
There's to love.
From the New York Times, I'm Anna Martin. This is the Modern Love Podcast. Today's story is about the love between a parent and a child, and what happens when that child grows up to be a parent. It's called A Time to Put Aside the Armor, written by Ariel Sabar and read by Eduardo Ballerini.
On a recent cross-country visit to my parents in California, I came down from my old childhood bedroom, still bleary with jet lag. I was startled by the sound of a boy's laughter from my parents' room. I tiptoed to the door and heard my father's low voice, then more of those high-pitched giggles. When I was a boy, this house was a battlefield. I clashed most often with my father. Growing up in Los Angeles in the 1980s, I wanted to be one of those postcard-perfect California boys, with the golden hair, the spray of freckles, the surfer's unflappable cool. But certain facts of ancestry had made that impossible. My father was an olive-skinned man born in the mountains of Iraq, a fish-out-of-water immigrant who mutilated English and couldn't get his clothes to match. I felt embarrassed when kids from school saw us together. At one point, I even stopped calling him Abba, or Dad. The sound we most often exchanged was silence. But when I opened the door on that recent visit, I saw a dark-haired boy, my 6-year-old son, Seth, laughing with my father. There they were, in a kind of Norman Rockwell pose. My father, 70, riding his stationary bike in his pajamas, part of his low-intensity morning exercise regimen. Seth, also in pajamas, perched on the bike's frame and clasping my father's shoulder for balance. Seth was counting aloud as his Saba pedaled toward the day's calorie-burning goal, tracked on the bike's handlebar display. 3 more calories to go, Saba, Seth said, beaming. Seth, you are a real inspiration, my father said. I sat down to watch their banter. My father with his soft accent, Seth with his bright, all-American voice. Why hadn't I noticed sooner how close they were? The last time we'd seen my father, on our turf in Washington, I'd heard glowing reports about the hours he and Seth spent ambling around Capitol Hill, or even just watching TV in my parents' hotel room. But I took these accounts as I might a babysitter's, as blandishments meant to assure parents their children were in good hands. Our 10 days in California, however, were different. There, for the first time, I had the evidence of my own eyes. I had evidence that is far harder to ignore. When Seth woke up each morning, he crept into my parents' bedroom to see if his Saba was awake. My father greeted him with a booming, "Good morning, America!" and spent afternoons teaching him knucklebones, a marble game my father had played as a boy on the riverbanks of Kurdistan, but that seemed to translate well enough to wall-to-wall carpet. Determined to be at his grandfather's side, Seth insinuated himself into routines I'd long ago written off as unbending. Every night before bed, my father eats a grapefruit at a cluttered tray table barely big enough for one. Now Seth was hustling a chair up to the other side and helping my father carve and eat his bedtime snack. On Saturday mornings, Seth went with my father to synagogue, touching the Torah scrolls with a borrowed prayer shawl and sitting through services with a patience I could never muster. In my father's eyes, Seth walked on water. Where my wife and I saw bullheadedness, my father saw resolve. Where we heard shrieks, my father heard a clear, beautiful voice, And double standards, or new ones anyway, abounded. When I was young, my father prickled at the mere mention of restaurants. He told me they were money pits, when we could eat my mother's leftover meatballs in the fridge, and the fact that there were no restaurants in Zaho, Iraq when he was a boy. But as soon as Seth hinted at a hankering for, say, pizza and brownies at a certain restaurant, my father was making plans for lunch on the town. "Yay, Saba!" Seth would cry out, in that clear, beautiful voice. I looked at my dad and saw a man enjoying a kind of second chance at fatherhood. Here was a young boy who adored him. Why were they such a pair, when my father and I, at least in my memory, were such a mismatch? The two of them were separated by an even greater gulf of years and culture, but they coasted where we stumbled. At first, I wrote it off to the simpler protocols of grandparenthood, with its premium on uncomplicated gestures of generosity and love. It was true, too, that after 4 decades in America, my father had changed. My American-born mother had brought a passing acceptability to his wardrobe. His English had improved. He is now a long-tenured professor at UCLA, and enough time has passed since his impoverished childhood that he allows himself occasional meals at restaurants, even if he still double-checks the bill. But something about this explanation seemed too easy. In a book I'd written about my father's life, I focused on our conflicts, on the postmodern Los Angeles boy being raised by the pre-modern Kurd. Had I, in the heat of storytelling, become too invested in a certain narrative of my childhood? Had I blinded myself to other, happier moments? After all, a way with children is not something a person suddenly acquires in his early 70s. If Seth craved my father's time, might I once have too? Since that visit, a few childhood memories have pecked at me. They come when it's quiet and I'm alone, when the defenses built up over a lifetime lower just enough to let in a hazy light. The summer mornings at the UCLA pool, when my father taught me how to hold my breath underwater, the two of us smiling at each other through goggles and blue water. The nights he lifted my floppy bones from the car after some colleague's dinner party and carried me to bed. Both of us fully aware that I was only feigning sleep. The afternoon on that bridge at Yosemite National Park, when he held my hand and we leapt together, like those older boys, into that big river. My father assured me recently that there were more times like those, many of them. He told me that when I was Seth's age, we played and laughed just as the two of them do now. I want to believe him, particularly now, with my son drawing the three of us closer. But the memories of conflict, of rebellion, of trying to define myself against who he was, it all throws off so much glare that I can make out little else. There is no doubt a sanctity to a child's relationship with his grandparents. But I suspect that another reason for my son's easy adoration of my father is that Seth is young, his love of family untested by peer pressure, by stabbing self-awareness, by the world. He is at an age where even I, the father who probably yells too much, who is tighter than absolutely necessary with chocolate chip cookies and TV, I can do no wrong. He recently asked my wife to buy him a button-down shirt and tie so he could look just like Daddy. He races to me with his box of magnets when I come home from work, tugging at my sleeves for help with a science project. We recently unbolted the training wheels from his bike, and most afternoons he calls me outside to see some new trick. I savor those moments, but worry now that Seth will scarcely remember them. Perhaps memories of early years were never really meant for sons, for whom growing up requires a kind of forgetting. Perhaps they are really for fathers, to wrap ourselves in when our sons begin that long, slow fade into adulthood. Watching my father with Seth has let me roll back time. It has shown me a version, at least, of who my dad was before I turned away from him. But it has done something else, too. The other evening, on a long weekend, when my wife and daughter were out of town, Seth and I went to the second-floor bedroom to look out the window at people milling at a metro stop across the street. The sun was sinking behind the row houses, and the lengthening shadows lent the scene an air of mystery. "Hey, Seth, let's pretend we're detectives," I said impulsively. I rooted through a drawer for an old pair of binoculars and handed them to my son. We were both now lying across the bedspread on our stomachs, like cops on a rooftop stakeout. "What do you think those people over there are up to?" I said, taking the binoculars back. "Tell me, Daddy." "Well," I said, "we're too far away to hear what they're saying. But what can we tell about them from their clothes, from the things they're carrying, from whether they're walking alone or in a group?" We uncovered vast criminal conspiracies, a forbidden romance, and 2 or 3 good deeds. And then I realized that it was nearly 2 hours past Seth's bedtime on a school night. "Can we play detective tomorrow too, Daddy?" said Seth, eyes wide, as I tucked him in. "That was kind of fun, huh?" I said, as much to myself, I realized, as to him. Alone downstairs later that night, I felt surprised at how easily I'd given myself over to Seth's world. I'm usually too preoccupied with work, with the notifications on my phone, with all the loose ends that seem to demand tying. I'm usually full of excuses. But tonight was different. Seth was the only thing in the world that mattered. And I knew that for reasons ancient and new, I owed it to my father.
When we come back, a tiny love story about a woman who takes a DNA test and makes a huge discovery about her family.
I'm Ricky Lewis, and this is my tiny love story. I'm a geneticist. At a conference where I was presenting, I spit into a tube for one of those DNA tests that are now all the craze. How fitting, but surprising, to discover not 1, but 6 half-siblings. I grew up with 1 full sister. Our parents, now deceased, never mentioned a sperm donor. I suppose that's how they quietly managed infertility in the 1950s. More than half a century ago, an anonymous man from Brooklyn gave us the gift of life. And years later, each other.
Hey, Ricky, how are you? It's great to talk to you.
Great. Nice to meet you.
I have so many questions about your story. I think we should start by going back in time a little bit. So you take this DNA test at a conference, and then you go home. Were you anxiously awaiting your results?
No, unlike most people, I forgot that I even took the test, because when you walk around at an exhibition, you're just trying to get free chocolate and T-shirts and things like that. I didn't even think about the fact that they took my DNA. So no, I forgot all about it.
How did it come back on your radar again?
It took me 2 years to even remember that I'd taken the test, and that was when my half-sister contacted me. And what she wrote was, "Ancestry DNA says we're close family, maybe first cousins. My maiden name is blank." I don't want to say her name. "Sound familiar? I grew up in Brooklyn." She initiated this back and forth, and I contacted Ancestry DNA right away and told them I was a geneticist, so they sent me all the technical papers, and I was sitting right where I'm sitting now, and I literally fell off the seat, because when I saw the data, and I get chills even telling you this, when I saw the data, I knew we weren't cousins. I knew we were half-siblings.
Mm-hmm. And was this half-sibling the one who emailed you and sort of kicked this whole thing off? the only half-sibling that you found?
Oh, no. That was the beginning. The next one fell out of the sky on January 24th. I guess that was 2019. And I immediately looked her up on Facebook, and I burst into tears because it was like looking in the mirror to see the second half sister. And she felt the same way, an instant connection. And I think I stopped counting after 7 because I couldn't take it anymore.
Wow. 7.
Yes.
What else did the results tell you?
I knew it came through my father's side. And it was just staggering. I was so confused because I knew my father didn't have an affair. That was never even a question. So we started thinking up all these crazy things like maybe our fathers were identical twins separated at birth. And it was the second half sister who still had an elderly relative, a woman in her mid-90s, who remembered that there was an artificial insemination involved. So that was a fact that we had. So if my half-sister number 2 knew she was from a sperm donor and half her DNA matches mine, or a quarter of her DNA matches mine, then, we were the products of a sperm donor.
How did it feel to process that news?
I don't even have the words to describe how you feel when you find something out like this. It changes who you are. It changes your picture of who you were. God, when it dawned on me that it was a sperm donor, I was just stunned. Who would think this would happen to a geneticist? It's crazy.
All of these revelations, these discoveries, does this change how you view your parents?
I knew my mother had a couple of miscarriages, and of course I wasn't aware of any infertility, but clearly in retrospect they had a fertility problem. And I don't think my mother or my father even knew that this happened, because I was very close to my mother, and we both knew I was going to be a scientist when I was 4 years old. And when I became a geneticist, I think she certainly would have said something to me, and she didn't.
It's sort of shocking to me that would occur without the consent of a couple. Yeah, I'm sort of blown away by that.
I've created a narrative that I can live with, and that is that my parents didn't know. Because being a woman and having had many gynecological exams, when you spread your legs and they put the sheet over you and they put that, whatchamacallit, lobster thing up you, you don't know what they're doing. How hard would it be to take a little pipette and just squirt someone's sperm up there? And then, bingo, a month later, my mother would have been pregnant. I mean, now we say it's paternalism and it's shocking and horrible, but in the context of the times, it maybe wasn't that bad. I wouldn't be here if they hadn't done that.
How does it make you feel that this sperm donation was likely hidden from your parents?
I'm okay with it. I mean, I'd rather they didn't know.
Tell me more about that.
Well, it's paternalistic of me, but I think it would have really upset them, particularly my father. On the other hand, I have 2 first cousins through my father, and I love them dearly, and I grew up with them. And, I hope they're not hurt by any of this. I do worry about that. Finding out that we're not blood cousins, what does that even mean? It means nothing. Because if anything I've learned from this is that your loved ones are who you're raised with. It doesn't matter where or when or how they were conceived.
Is a geneticist saying that genes don't matter?
That's right. That's exactly what I'm saying. They don't matter. It's the person who you are that matters.
Ricky, thank you so much for sharing your story with me today.
Oh, you're welcome.
Our show is produced by Julia Botero and Hans Buetow. It's edited by Sarah Saracen. This episode was mixed by Elishaba Itup. Dan Powell created our Modern Love theme music. The original music in this episode is by Marian Lozano. Digital production by Mahima Chublani and Des Ibaqua, and a special thanks to Ryan Wegner at Autumn. Modern Love was founded by Dan Jones. Mia Lee is the editor of Modern Love Projects. Modern Love has a virtual event coming up. On March 9th at 7 p.m., we hope you'll join us for The Morning at Night, a live stream event from the New York Times daily newsletter, The Morning. Get it? The Morning at Night? We'll share love stories written by readers and read by Oscar nominee Ariana DeBose. It'll be a ton of fun. You can RSVP for free at nytimes.com/morningatnight. I'm Anna Martin. Thanks for listening.